Greetings and welcome to this week's edition of the Rock County Civics Academy Lesson Plan. The Rock County Civics Academy is a production of Common Sense Reestablished. This LLC was founded by Richard Gerber, Paul Murphy, and Dwayne Severson. CSR is a communications company that provides educational programming on topics of a public interest and is not affiliated with any political party, and is committed to common sense-based principles as espoused in the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights. Our programs are non-partisan. That is, we are not affiliated with any organized or even unorganized political party or political movement. This series of presentations is made possible through the support of our growing list of benefactors, including Big Radio, JATV, Public Access Media, Ragnarsoft, ragnarsoft.com, Have Camera, Wisconsin, Tom Edwards, The Italian House, Havana Coffee on Milton Avenue. Please keep in mind the views expressed are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent the views of our benefactors or the broadcast entities who will be reproducing our content for later public distribution.
Good evening and welcome. It's a pleasure to have this esteemed group of folks gathered together. The game plan tonight is very straightforward. We want to discuss the concept of what makes community really a great place to reside. How we can put our energies together to create an inclusive environment that frankly allows everybody the opportunity to have a voice heard and be part of the solution to the challenges of us living together and in somewhat of a degree of harmony in a big city environment where, well, frankly, it's a challenge sometimes. If you don't know the route to get your voice heard, it's difficult for you to actually be heard and be part of the solution, be part of that decision-making process. So tonight we're going to focus in on just what exactly is community. What is it all about, and how do we actually form a community that is all of those basic things: inclusive, representative, and more importantly, reflective of the values that we all hold special and near to ourselves. I want to introduce our panel. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome Lisa Tollefson. Lisa is the Rock County Clerk. She as well is the Chief Election Official, and frankly, she brings a perspective to the table of really the foundation of holding this thing together is the election process. And we'll talk through the importance of it and the safeguards that are in place and why it is what it is. Sitting next to her is Michael Jackson. Michael is a retired minister. He's got a long history of building community in not only this particular area, but across the country in his various assignments through his years professionally as a minister. He now serves as a member of the Janesville City Council and has more than a handful of other interests in the community where he's a volunteer and an advocate for those things that make us what we are, the community that we are in fact here to celebrate. Sitting next to Michael is John Cruzan. John is a retired healthcare executive. He's a past member of the Milton School Board. I believe he was the chairman of the Milton School Board for a period of time. He's currently the chair and a member of the Milton Chamber of Commerce. And in his free time, what little I guess he has, he was able to be one of the founders of the Milton Youth Center, which is the first and the only youth center created in the community of Milton, and it's continuing to grow strong. So he's got some experience on what it takes to build a community from that perspective. Sitting next to John is Rhonda Suda. Rhonda is the president and chief executive officer of the Southwest Wisconsin Workforce Development Board. She brings job training programs to the area, and as you know, part of what holds a community together, part of the fabric, is the educational institutions that are there to broaden young minds and to make us all better informed about what community is really about it. And more importantly, her role today is to help bring forward those dollars necessary for crucial job training and education things that that supports the economy that we depend on so much in this area. Next to Rhonda, we've got Neil Johnson. Neil is the Janesville Gazette's business reporter. He's got a view of the community that is kind of a unique perspective. He gets to see it from that as an individual who objectively is trying to view and look at all of those things and all of those people that are contributors to this fabric that we call community. And finally, to my immediate right is Danella Samara. Danella is a small business operator, and she frankly is a transplant from Albania. She came here during the Cold War. You might recall when the Soviet Union collapsed, all of the Eastern Bloc nations that were affiliated, they too went through a cultural revolution and a revolution in governance. And she made this country her home. She was one of those that was fortunate to get out of a difficult situation. She came here and essentially built a life for her and her family, taking advantage of all the attributes that we have that make us a good, solid, sound community. So that's going to offer, I think, a starkly different perspective for each of us. She can speak a little bit from where she's come from and what she's experienced since she's been here. So that's our panel. With that, welcome all. It's great to have you here. I want to start with Michael Jackson tonight. Michael, you've had an opportunity to be a community builder in a lot of different locales across the country. And yet, in each of those exercises, there's a common denominator or two that make a community a place where you want to live and raise a family and call it home. In your experience, what makes this area a special area?
Thank you for the question. I can think of a number of things that make Janesville special. I like to tell people I love Janesville, and I think that's a heartfelt sentiment. But when I say I love Janesville, I'm not talking about the brick and mortar that makes up our businesses or our schools or downtown. It's the people, it's the communities that come together to make our community what it is. I appreciate the diversity that I see, whether I'm in one part of the city or another, talking to this individual or that. It's interesting to hear the diversity of thought, to experience a diversity of background. We're caught between all of these major metropolitan areas, and it's kind of like so many of those people from those areas have settled here. We've become a stew, and we've become one community of many communities. I would close my brief comment with a phrase that I borrowed from my years of being a minister. I used to tell my church that each one of the individuals in the church were the church. The church was not the building or the parking lot or the grounds. Each and every individual was a microcosm of the church as a whole. And I'd like to think the same is true of Janesville. Each one of us is a microcosm of the whole. The city, if I could use bad grammar, the city is us. We are the community.
Thank you, Michael. Danella, you have a different perspective. You spent the first 20-some years of your life in Albania, and you experienced community there. In fairly short order, what do you see as the stark differences between the community you grew up with and now the community that you have embraced?
Well, I'm honored to be here. Who would have thought 20 years ago that I can, be in the middle of such wonderful people? It's true. It was a complete different world, let's say. And one thing that's the same, people are the same everywhere. We love to be in the community. We have hard time, adjusting to each other's desires and thoughts. But people, I think, are, all over the same. But what I found different here, we were so thirsty for democracy. We thought like no other place in earth, and I still do believe that, than America, you see, more than, or better, I should say, how the system works, from the federal to the state to the local. And to me, it's wonderful. I'm sure it can be better, but it's like the first day we came and we start, learning and see how things work. It's like, oh my God, this place, they have pretty much seen all over what has happened throughout the years, and they just picked and made something a lot better than everybody else. That's the way I see how the system works here.
Neil, you've, in the position as a reporter, have seen a lot of different perspectives of community, and you've seen the good things about a community, you've seen the challenges of a community, things that challenge us to be better. In your perspective, compare the community as you know it today versus when you moved here 10 years back or 12 years back. Are we stronger? Are we weaker? Are we more inclined to search out differences? Just what's your perspective?
I think that there have been shifts in some of those areas. I do believe it's the case that there tends to be a layer of I don't know if you want to call it a binary or bifurcated thought, but when I moved 12 years ago, I moved from Illinois to Wisconsin. And I've never been able to figure out if it's a Wisconsin thing or if it's a Janesville, Wisconsin thing. But the biggest breath of fresh air moving from another state to Janesville here in Wisconsin was the fact that I could literally walk up to any person in the public and feel equally comfortable polling them with just I'm a question asker by nature. It's what I do, and it's a lot of it's the fiber of who I am. But I've never, and very seldom have I encountered like a local resident in Janesville where I haven't felt comfortable just approaching a person and asking them a question, even if I've never met them before. That's not the same everywhere. I think there's a sense that people can say, well, small towns everywhere are the same. Well, I'm here to tell you that this community has people who are engaged at all levels, at all social economic strata. People who you can walk up and ask a question, or you can walk up and inquire about something that you don't know and get a real answer, and that's unique. And that's something that I think hasn't changed in the 12 years that I've lived here. It's a comfortable place to be, and people are more comfortable despite political differences, despite partisanship, are, I think, more inclined to be comfortable in their own skin and not ashamed of it. And that's real. That's something that Janesville has that doesn't exist just everywhere.
It's interesting to bring that perspective, because there are some that would argue that through the years we've become more divisive. We've taken on more of a confrontational mode and less of a conciliatory, find compromise, find middle ground sort of mode. John Cruzan, you're here with a great experience across the region from the perspective of not only a healthcare executive, but you're in a little smaller community that's growing rapidly, that's changing dramatically, and that's Milton. Have you seen a progression or a change or an evolution in folks in their attitudes and how they approach the idea of community?
I think there has been. I think there are people willing to get involved. When I think of early history, I was too young and naive to even be thinking about those kinds of things. But as I have grown there and raised a family, now raising grandchildren there's so many good things to be involved in, and there are seemingly enough people to be interested in doing that. People get along for the most part, and there are always differences and polarizations that are out there, but the community's doing very well at communicating and working together. So.
Rhonda, Suda, you bring the perspective to the table of the industry side of the coin. Has business, how we conduct business, changed in the community in your years of bringing workforce development programs to be that supportive element that helps keep our economy strong?
I think one of the things that I've realized over the course of just the last few years, and it's really kind of difficult for everybody to put perspective, is that every single occupation that we have in the city of Janesville and the county of Rock is important. And it doesn't matter if you are serving food, it doesn't matter if you're a CEO, it doesn't matter if you are a janitor, if you're a machine operator, if you're checking people out, if you're checking people in. And there's a value to work that needs to be taught, I think, at a very young age. And I think we went through an epiphany when GM left, where so much of our identity was tied to a single industry. And so much of our economy was tied to a single industry. When that left, I still strongly believe, and I've been in Janesville my entire life, is that it made our city more resilient, it made our county stronger, it made our businesses stronger, it made us less risk adverse. I think I'm doing the negatives the right way there. It put us in a better position to be competitive, and that's what we have to be, because we are competing for our kids to stay here or at least come back after college. We are competing for businesses. We're competing for builders to build the houses that we need and the roads that we need. And so when we present ourselves as a unified community, if we present ourselves as, you know, we may not always be on the same page, but damn it, we're a part of the same book, right? When we have that identity, and I think that's grown in the city of Janesville and the county of Rock, definitely throughout the last 12 years.
Lisa Tollefson, one of the barometers that I think people gauge the civility of our community is how smoothly the election process works, or for that matter, how it doesn't work. You've been at the helm of the election process here for a period of time, and has the atmosphere changed? And has it changed for the better or for the worse? And frankly, what is the future in your eyes?
Wow.
And you're limited to 35 minutes to answer.
Okay, so let's just start poll worker training right now.
Yeah.
We'll take care of that. I have seen people get more involved, not just as poll workers, which in 2020 we had so many people step up and help. It was amazing. We needed them, and they did. And this community has always done that. They've always stepped up to help when they needed to. We have people more active and more involved and listening, trying to be part of the system. And that's great, because that's part of the community, that taking time to learn the subjects, learn what you're voting on, being part of the process, learning the process. And I think people are trying to learn that more and understand all the differences. It's been interesting over the since 2020, all the different things that are happening. And sometimes when
Well, your job's gotten tougher since
it's
2020.
it's definitely got more interesting.
It's definitely got more interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah. Give us a couple of examples of just how interesting it's become, and perhaps your assessment as to why.
I think my job has gotten much more interesting. I have a lot more public records requests for all of my records from the elections. Lots of questions about how does this work? Why is this done this way? Some people not believing certain things of how our systems work. I think part of it is that sometimes it's easy to, when you're very emotional, involved in something, sometimes it's easy to believe the myth or the misinformation that it is to believe the actual truth of something. And there's been lots of misinformation that's been spread around. And sometimes a myth tends to travel much, much faster than the truth to correct it coming behind it. And I think that's part of the piece that's out there. I really like when people ask me questions to understand how things work.
It's always a fascinating thing for me to observe how we challenge our institutions, and as you quiz individuals about the source of truth that they're trying to deliver to you. We rely a lot on well, I read it on the internet, so it's got to be true. I read it in the Gazette, so my gosh, it has to be true.
Of course.
But how much actual hard study do we really put into an issue so that, as an informed person, I can go to Michael Jackson on the city council and say, these are the 10 points regarding this topic that I think you need to consider as you make your vote on whether or not the city does this. Are you seeing a more informed, more active constituency, Michael, coming to you for answers?
I think that people like to think they're more informed. Whether they are more informed or not, I guess that would be up to debate. We have so much information out there, and much of that information is biased. It carries with it a certain partisanship or whatever, and oftentimes they will take that as being informed, but they're only informed as to a portion of the truth, not the whole truth. My job on the city council is to strike a balance. When I look at an issue, one, I look at the facts of the issue, but I have to balance that with how is this issue going to play out in the lives of the people that live out on Wright Road or Franklin Street or wherever. What is the balance? How does this play out? How is it perceived? Is what they think they know truth, or is it not truth? And part of my job is informing them, explaining, trying to listen, and try to give them a plausible explanation as to why the council or whatever acts the way it does.
Neil, you have a job of trying to keep a finger on the pulse of community and have a clear view of the sentiment, the feeling, the general underlying tone that you hear on the streets, because it is kind of the guiding post as to that whole issue of stability in community. What are the tools you use to keep the pulse on the community, and how do you filter the information so that you feel confident that you got a source of truth?
I think you have to not always go into a question asking situation thinking in your mind that either A, you've already got the answer, or you know the proper or correct answer, or B, the answer that you may get is predictable based on who you'd ask. I'm continually surprised as a news gatherer at the number of questions that I ask a given source, and I have to remind myself always, well, I didn't expect quite that answer to that question, because it doesn't necessarily line up with what may be my personal opinion of how that person would have answered the question. And I have to remind myself continually as a newspaper reporter that's bias. That's my own inherent bias. Everybody has it. You can never split any line of thought completely down the middle for the sake of balance. It's an impossibility. But I think I think people have to ask questions, and at the core of things, actually listen to the response. The listening set portion of then I've asked you a question and your response is, I'm not thinking about my next line, I'm thinking about what your response is. And I think that is what I guess what I seek in any kind of discourse in a community, is people to listen.
Cruzan, is business easier to conduct or more difficult to conduct now in the city of Milton and in the community, based upon your experience and you've been in a position to watch it for a long time. Are we, from your perspective, are we headed down a comfortable path?
It's more comfortable right now than it was for a period of time in the last year or two, from my particular perspective. I find that you have to be intentional in your communications, you have to care, you have to somehow demonstrate that, and you have to become believable to the people that you're serving in a public role in a variety of ways. And I can't pontificate how to do that. I have ideas that have worked for me, but it's a lot of work to be listening to people, as Neil talks about, to sort out the information from the disinformation. And well, you got to be on your toes about that. I don't mean you're on tenterhooks about it all the time, but you have to be diligent, and sorting out your own biases, I think, is an important thing, because heavens knows we do all have those. So is it easier now than it was? In a way, it's easier for me because I've spent years and years developing individual relationships with many, many key people in the community, so that if a crisis comes up, for instance, I'm on the Chamber of Commerce board, and an issue comes up between the chamber or businesses and the city, I can get on the phone and immediately someone will take my call, and I can explain the issue and get answers from the city people that are often different than what people have thought they were. And that's time and effort over years of building relationships. So is that easy to do? In a way, but in a way it's a lot of work, and it's constant.
Danella, you come from a background that's somewhat unique, and you're a business builder. You've gone through an evolution of being an employee to now a proprietor, and you've got a handful of different business interests. And how do you measure the barometer of the community to know it's the right time to pull the trigger and expand your business, or to just sit tight and wait? What are the tools you use to say, hey, it's good for my community now, or wait a minute, I'm uncomfortable and I want to hold back?
Well, to my perspective, I opened my first business in 2011. Was just still the very hard times right after the recession, and it was a time when the GM left, and but it's always, people are going to need to have their necessities, at least. Not any kind of business that it's not something you really need to do, but I open a hair salon, so people are going to need to get their hair done. And then what I sense in Janesville, I think it's a city, it's a town that has so much potential for business, because I do look around, in Madison, even Milwaukee, the way Janesville is built and the way people are in Janesville, it has so much potential. Anytime I can open another business if I could. So it's very unique. It's not a very big town, but it's not small, and it has, the people are very supportive for local businesses. That's what I've experienced myself. You say, hey, this is my idea, talking to my clients, and all of them will really support you to the level you've never expected.
To what extent do you have a roadmap that takes you to the right places at the right time, to ask the right question of the right person, to get the permission to move forward with your new project? Is that a roadmap that's absolutely clear to you? Or is it something that you tiptoe through and try the various doors until you can get to the right one?
It's very tiptoe.
Very tiptoe, okay.
At least in my case. You just don't give up. But yeah, it'll be more, barricades than you think. But again, the support of the people does, it always, make me move. It's like, come on, you can do it. We'll be there for you. And then you get those, that try to make it hard for you, but you just don't give up. but there is very tiptoe.
It is very tiptoe, and we'll pursue that just a little bit. Rhonda, Suda, you're in a business that people have to want you if you're going to succeed. In spite of the fact that you're bringing a lot of dollars and a lot of opportunity, you've got to convince folks that they want to get involved with that level of, I hate to use the phrase bureaucracy, but that level of outside involvement, that it's hard sometimes to give up my autonomy and my control. You got to depend on somebody else. Is it easier now than
No.
say in those early days when you and I worked together on workforce issues?
So, I came into the workforce board in 2010, so we were just kind of getting at the beginning of the end of the recession, right? So we were dealing with thousands and thousands of people still. All of the programs that we operate provide some form of subsidized training and supportive services to help you get through that training that support our local industry. We're not going to train individuals for jobs that don't currently exist in our industry. However, about 85% of the 2030 jobs that we can expect really have not been created yet. So technology moves us very, very quickly when we look at occupations. I struggle to find people. We have programs that are targeted towards certain groups, so different cohorts, but I'm also competing with business, right? Competing with our technical colleges. Everybody wants that person who doesn't quite know what he wants to do, so we can convince him that we can help him figure out what he wants to do. And then add value to our organizations, our businesses, our communities, et cetera. So, we're running out of people.
Is the playing field, you say you're competing with other folks, other businesses, is the playing field level?
In regard to
That competition and getting into that
I can't even say it's necessarily, I guess, true competition in the extent that we're all seeking the very best for that individual, right? And we still have our own interests, mine is to support the community. So if I can't convince Johnny to come into one of our workforce development programs so he can pursue a credential that's going to support the community, I'm going to encourage him to go to our local business to find that occupation so he can support the community. So it's just that if we look at workforce development as a system, we do not have enough people in the talent development system to prepare for the jobs that we're going to have for tomorrow, to prepare for the jobs that we're going to have as people retire, and to prepare for the jobs that any company would have just based on simple growth expectations.
And somehow that is one critical element that we have to hold together if we're going to have community in play and in place. We have to have a supportive system that is bringing talent to the table so that industry business has the resources they need to grow and prosper. And that's a continuous challenge. How, in your experience, how best can that be addressed as a community?
We have to all come to the table in this idea of what our expectations are of our K-12 system is one. I honestly, I'll tell you, if we don't figure that out, the job that I do is more difficult and it's more costly for the taxpayer. If we don't figure that out, it is more frustrating for the employer. If we don't figure it out, it's more expensive for that post-secondary education provider to retrain or to prepare a person to learn. So K-12 is extremely important, right? And that system that supports so many kids, we have 18 years to convince our kids to stay in the city of Janesville. Sometimes 19, depending upon where they are. But really, 18 years. It's just about 2 decades. And I don't know necessarily if we're going to be successful at it. Because we have to have the community where they want to come back to. And we have to have the infrastructure of really good schools measured by what they provide to the community. Are we graduating kids that are prepared for college or post-secondary ed? Are we graduating kids that are prepared to get into the workforce? There's opportunities for kids to earn an associate's degree while they're in high school. Are we actually pushing that? I think it starts there. It has to, if we want to build that pipeline, that's the only pipeline I can guarantee that we have.
That kind of begs the question, is it easy for John or Joan Q. Citizen to be a part of the solution to that, to actually access and get their issues to the table so they're part of the deliberation that makes them feel like they have an opportunity to be part of the solution? Michael, you're on the city council. How do you reach out and guarantee that every voice is heard, or at least every active voice is heard, and sometimes I guess you find yourself in the position of it's only the loudest voice that gets heard? How do you filter all of that, and how do you make sure that you're including everybody in that information gathering, truth finding process?
It's a challenge, Rich. Part of the problem with that is the diversity of the problems that come to the council or to any of us that are at this table. On one hand, I might be dealing with dogs in the cemetery as we did a year ago. On the other hand, do we really need four-way stops on every intersection in downtown, or are we overdoing it? Now that's an exaggeration. Do we need to spend $40–60 million on a sports arena? Those are big, complex issues, and everyone that deals with these issues feels like their particular opinion is really important. And how do I answer your question? Doggone, I work on that every day because I get those emails or those calls or voicemails. And what I'm finding is those people really want me to listen. I don't know that they necessarily expect me individually to solve their problem, but they really want to go away from that conversation feeling like he cared, he listened, I'm in this with him, he's in it with me, and together maybe we can work this thing out. Now, I try to make sure every concern is dealt with. If I can't deal with it, I refer to whoever can deal with it. But every person deserves being heard, and I try to provide that. I think that's part of community.
I can only relate to my own experience as an elected official, and many, well, oftentimes, nearly as many times as I would get an inquiry from somebody asking me to take a look at a particular city issue, I'd have a near equal number of people coming asking me to take a look at an issue that had absolutely nothing to do with the city, had absolutely nothing to do with anything within my purview. And I can see where it becomes extremely frustrating for John or Joan Q. Citizen when I can't give them the direct answer that they're looking for. What can we do to help the community have a better understanding of what is the role of city government, or what is the role of county government, or what does the county clerk do? How do you get out and educate the public about what your role really is, and sometimes more importantly, what your role isn't? Lisa, your thoughts?
And it's tough because you know that county government is an extension of the state, so we can only do what the state allows us to do, where with the cities and the towns and the villages, they have a little bit more leeway. But communication and what we're doing here is getting people information on how things work, asking questions. One of the greatest things that I think is when the high schools have their poll workers, their students in their AP classes come and work at the polls to learn the different levels, to learn their civics in school, how all of it works together to make everything work. And I think that's really important, is how those intertwine and how they interwork is really important to get that information out.
Do we do an adequate job, Neil, in your opinion, of helping the public understand how they access the decision makers in the various levels of government that you cover?
I think it's an incredibly difficult task. I don't know that there's any magic way that you can reach out to 64,500 people and say, this is exactly how you have your pipeline to the city council, or this is exactly how you have your pipeline to a municipal clerk's office, or you can cast those offers on websites, you can put them on billboards, but I think that the best way that anybody can keep that pipeline open, and I say this all the time, is the people who are in an elected position or people who are in a municipal position of authority, it's just to make yourself openly accessible and responsive when those people reach out to you. I think that it's always great to cultivate relationships on your route to taking public office. But once you're an elected official, let's say a city council member, then the litmus test becomes, do you continue to be accessible? Do you continue to pick up the phone? It's probably a lot easier said than done on some days. But that's my viewpoint of it.
There, I get the impression, Janella, that in your experience, it's been some hard work trying to find the right person to ask the questions that you needed to get resolved to do the things that you wanted to do. And it's a trial and error sort of thing. Is there a way that you would suggest would make business easier to conduct? Would it help if people knew who to see or where to go, or if they had a roadmap, or at least somebody that they could reach out to and say, take me through this process?
Yes, I wish I knew, what I know today. You kind of learn as it goes in a hard way, especially, at least in the business field that I am trying to work. It's very little knowledge. I mean, it's probably a lot of information out there, but for a person to just collect that on its own and try to find the right path, it's very hard. But what's very helpful is what you do every day, and I happen to talk to you. You sit and you talk to people. And, it can be anybody that all the local officials, the elected ones, that can sit and say, hey, I'm here to help. And I bet you every business person needs to know more, because you kind of go through yourself and you pick here and there, but it's not like anybody will sit and teaches you or shows you. I can give a very quick example. Mm-hmm. When I started building the coffee shop, I got all the plans and everything started, and then one of the inspectors came and said, well, we have to change a lot of things. I wished you called one of us. You came to the city and said, this is what I want to do, and then I was going to come down and show you exactly what you needed to do before you went through all this. But how did I know that you have to start with talking to the inspector? You think like that comes after all. And those are small details that I'm sure, it's hard to solve and get to everybody. But as much as, help, business people need a lot of help. That's the way, at least I see it. Mm-hmm. And you have helped me tremendously, kind of give me a general idea of, how things work. And that's like a pretty good start. I hope I get more of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is at all levels. It comes down to the equation of you've got to know who to call or how to access the system to figure out where your questions can get best addressed. And it's remarkable, the things that you're willing to put in the time and the energy. And it takes a lot of time and energy to do that. But if you're willing to put in the time and the energy, you can get to answers. But should it be that difficult? Are there ways to simplify the system, I guess? Neil, thoughts?
A lot of times if I want to get an answer to a question, I have to get down in the weeds. And some people are more tenacious or more adept at finding a pathway to getting a specific set of answers. But one thing, and this goes back to what I initially said, that I've found with this community, that there's this level of engagement that's more kind, more open, more casual than a lot of other places. I can't believe the number of things that I've gotten ironed out simply by just asking one of my neighbors. And that's another, in all honesty, that's another thing that it's unique to a community this size, that we still have that kind of connectivity in our neighborhood where you can knock on somebody's door and ask them a question, or you can pull your car over and stop and yell a question out of your car window and get a casual answer that's helpful. I think that people tend to forget in a community like Janesville. It's not a huge city. It's not a small town by any means, but that there still is people who are willing to provide any information that they have that can help you along your way, and people shouldn't forget that. I think that that'd be my biggest piece of advice is, hey, if you want to figure out how to get in touch with a city council member, ask your next door neighbor. Chances are they know somebody who's less than 7 degrees separated from them. And that's whether you're in Chicago or whether you're in Janesville. I believe that.
One of the, I believe, most thankless jobs in the world is to be an elected official in a local government setting, because ultimately the buck always ends up stopping with that local elected official, and they may or may not have had a handle in the decision-making process that ends up putting them on the hot seat, but they're ultimately responsible for it because they're the visible face of city government, or they're the visible face of county government. And oftentimes they're the only face that some of us know when we have a particular issue that comes up that we need to resolve. If you were to paint the picture of the ideal elected official, if ultimately we all believe that the target's on your back, you paint the picture of who that person should look like, and then convince me that that person really ought to be running for that office, because is it all it's cut out to be Michael Jackson?
I will give you a brief answer. 3-4 weeks ago, I was walking across the church parking lot where I attend, and I was going to the car to get my wife a sweater. She was cool in the building. And as I was making my way across the parking lot, a gentleman whom I did not know, I'd never seen before, stopped me, and he's, "What are you going to do about property taxes? When are you going to lower them?" And I thought he was joking at first, but it only took me a second to realize from his countenance he was serious. He wanted me to lower his property taxes right then and there on that church parking lot. And there wasn't any way of giving a defense. One, I can't lower property taxes. In fact, the city council really is very limited in any power to lower property taxes. But I understood that gentleman was angry. He was ticked off about his property taxes. I was a local official and I was handy. And so he was able to vent, as you put it. I had the target on my back. He was able to vent. And I walked off and got the sweater. Didn't solve anything, but he got to.
They felt better for a minute or two.
Yeah, he got it off his chest.
Yeah. Lisa, what motivated you to run for office? By golly, you came from a very settled career doing other stuff that I think you probably enjoyed the dickens out of, and then you got up one day and said, "I want to put a target on my back."
That's not what I thought when I started. I was actually looking for a new challenge, and the previous clerk, Lori Stotler, took a different position, and I was actually appointed originally.
But you had to apply for the job.
I did apply for the job.
You had a smaller election. There were a smaller number of people voting on whether or not you would get that job. But you had to run for that office.
I was
You had
looking,
to consciously put the target on your back.
yeah, somewhat, yes.
The truth comes out.
Yes, but I loved what I did as a town clerk, and I needed a new challenge. And it was just a really good opportunity to take on that challenge, and that I love what I do. I truly love what I do. I get to make a difference, and this amazing community, I get to help everybody. So,
What are the qualities that you think anybody thinking of running for office ought to possess that will help ensure their success? And limit it to 2 or 3, okay?
willingness to listen. Actually listen. It's extremely important to make sure you actually are understanding what they're asking for. Like Neil was saying, the perception. Sometimes you have a preconceived perception of what they're trying to say. You really need to listen to understand and look at their perspective. When people come into my office, I'm always telling my staff, you have no idea what they went through to get to this office today. And take that into perspective. Unless you walked a mile in their shoes, you don't understand where they're coming from, and listening helps you get there. It's extremely important. Hardworking, being willing to dig to find things out, and not being afraid to ask questions and get help, because it's a community. It's not one person doing the job. It's a whole team. I work with 29 municipal clerks, and all of their poll workers. To pull off an election is not one person. It's a community that makes that happen.
After you go through a particularly difficult, challenging election cycle, and you have people coming from a dozen different directions challenging the decisions that you made or challenging the results of that election, you put yourself in a position where you got to stand up and be a defender for what that system is that you're about. Does that get tougher or easier with time passing?
Both.
Are we as civil now as we should be? Maybe that's a fair question.
It depends on the person, because it's not always the same. It's easier as I go along because I am very involved in the legislative process and working with elections. I train other county clerks. I train in other counties, not just ours. So I know the process really well. So that knowledge gives me more strength. It's tougher because you have so many people that are their mind is set, and they're not open to listening sometimes, or they don't really want the answer that you are giving them, and that's kind of tough. So it's both. But after 2020, I had got a lot of angry calls because the AP switched my results. But I also got an outpouring of support. I had people send me emails and thank yous and flowers, and the community was so supportive of what we did, and that was amazing.
John Cruzan, paint for me the picture of the ideal individual that ought to be running for a local government office. What are the strengths that they should be bringing to the table if not only they're going to be successful, but they're going to be able to deal with the challenges?
Well, the listening thing is a huge piece, but they have to bring character to the job. You've got to be who you say you are. You have to be congruent. That sounds so simple. People aren't they? Well, we know people who aren't. And so you really need to work on that piece. You have to believe in the entity that for which you're running for office, whether it's your school board or whether it's your city council or whatever those positions are. I hear people elected to boards that then denigrate the city or denigrate the school district, or I can't imagine keeping a job if I was on its board in the private sector if I were denigrating the organization. That's not to say you don't deal with issues and problems. It's not ignoring those, but you got to manage up the organizations. You got to manage up the city. You got to care enough to to connect people. I think it's important that people running for office take a look at the time investment, because it's huge. And it's not always going to be convenient, and there's stuff to prepare and read and become educated on and do homework yourself if you can't sort it out from all of that. And I think some people don't know how to look at that time. Well, you just go to a meeting, you know, every couple of weeks, and that's what it is. Well, those of you who've done it know it's far, far, far different than that. When I was president of the Milton School Board for about 6 years, it was like a full-time job. I was invested in people and issues all day long. Now, I was retired from my work so that I had that time to invest, but I can't imagine doing it without having that time. That doesn't mean I'm special, it just was something I realized. This takes a big commitment. It's huge, and it doesn't really ever leave you any time. It doesn't go away, it's always there.
Rhonda, Suda, you've not had the experience of being an elected official, but you have a board of directors that guides what you do, that's made up of elected officials, and they rotate on and off the board. What are the qualities of those individuals that, when you're assembling a board of directors, you're looking for in the people that govern your operations? Because they are in fact elected officials, and you have, in a sense, got to pick and choose and elect them to serve on your board. What are you looking for?
So the way the workforce development system is set up is a certain pot of our money comes from the federal government to the state, to the local workforce development boards. However, the primary fiscal entity or controller of those funds are our county board supervisors in the counties that we represent. And that board, that consortium for our area represents Grant, Greene, Iowa, Lafayette, and Richland County. And what that means is that if myself or my staff misuse those funds, and the workforce board as a nonprofit is not able to account for that, the counties are on the hook for that. So that's my obligation to the counties. And the other role that consortium plays is that they do appoint people to the actual workforce board, which is approximately 20 members, representing primarily business throughout our 6-county area. And you know, I have to agree. When you're, you know, don't mess up your own house, right? So if you're an elected official, or like for me, I represent, you know, not only my board, but I represent the counties and I represent my team. Don't make them messy, and don't put them ever in a position where they're going to have to try to justify something, you know, that you do, and that comes down to your character, right? Support it. If I'm ever in a situation where I feel like I can't support something, I always make sure that at least I'm not making something worse. You know, at the very minimum, don't go into situations and make them worse. You know, leave that to somebody else.
Neil, you're in a position where, as you cover elections and cover elective races as they go on, there we go, we're losing our props. Welcome to live TV. You have to evaluate. You evaluate candidates, and you bring your bias into the room as you're evaluating candidates. What are you looking for in that individual who's the ideal to fit as a member of the city council in Milton or in Janesville or in Evansville or Edgerton, or the ideal person to sit on the county board of supervisors? What qualities are you looking for?
Yeah, I don't know if there is necessarily like an ideal kind of a one ideal mold that you know, if every single person on this panel had the same the same mental approach to answering a question, or the same mental approach to viewing we wouldn't have you wouldn't have a range of thought or opinion to be able to gather from. And one of the things that the way I look at it is, you could do a baseball analogy where I don't know if there is any one necessarily best seat in the house to most accurately view a baseball game. Some portions of the game can be best seen from the mezzanine. You may not be able to gauge where a fly ball is going to go from that seat, though. That may a person who spends more time in the bleachers and has a different vantage point or a different viewpoint of the game itself can say, yeah, I can tell where the ball is going to go right off the bat almost every time. And I think that in ideal, maybe there isn't one ideal mold or model of a person to be on a city council, but it's to have different viewpoints and to have people with sometimes opposing viewpoints to be able to stop and listen to each other. There's nothing better that I would see in local government. There's a difference between being an ideal candidate, running, getting elected, but then you're elected, so then the work starts. And I think that's what gets, I think, forgotten a little bit on the path. But if you have people who can say, I came into this thinking my idea on this, whatever this topic of debate is, was the right thing. But after listening to you, I think your idea is better. Or I like parts of your idea. I don't normally agree with you, but geez, it makes a lot of sense. I think if you can have governing boards that can look past the idea that there has to be, everybody has to define their bias and everybody has to take a stance or a boilerplate approach and saying this is who I am politically based on whatever the national idea of a conservative or a progressive. I don't know that in local government that's needed in so much as it is to be able to step back and look at people's individual viewpoints and decide pragmatically what's the blend of the thought here today and what makes the most sense coming out of that.
Danella, last question for you. What do you see as you're evaluating candidates for office? What are you looking for, and what do you want to see in those office candidates?
It's always easy to say. I know it's hard to do, but for people to get elected, first of all, I would really consider somebody that's biased, because I think politics interferes too much in a lot of decisions, and people that are open-minded. It's some people are just set in their way so much that anything new that comes across, they just don't want to deal with it. And it's so many times, the opportunities for people are on the hands of those people, and they got to know that they really make a difference in people's life. So they got to use their power right and try to do the best they can. When your colleagues, are trying to tell you something, listen. Or people are trying to tell. There is a reason why are they, really pushing it. Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes you got to get them out of your way and really try to do, what's the best for that person or for that community. So.
I think the common theme I've heard a lot of in terms of qualities we're looking for is people that understand the math and can handle the whole concept of proportional behaviors. You have been given one of these and two of these, mm-hmm. and you should use them in that proportion. Is that a fair observation? Mm-hmm. I think so. And I think at this stage, if there's any questions from the audience, we'd love to have those, bring them on in if you've got one. A question, I guess we'll start with Neil, and the direct question for Neil is: the local newspaper remains the linchpin of a community information source. It's kind of the glue that tends to hold us together. The paper's changing. What's the role of the paper, and how are you responding to fulfilling that mission of being the glue in this constant evolution of it becoming tougher and tougher and tougher to cover the media, because frankly the resources aren't there to do it?
The only thing, and I think that anybody, whether they're in government or whether they're in news media, there's this pressure to say, you know, it's my personal responsibility to hold up the walls of an institution, whether it's the local newspaper or City Hall, or but I feel like the news industry is buffeted, and it's scary. A lot of times it's scary. But my viewpoint is the best that I can do when I get up in the morning is to try to pursue truth. That's just about as hard as anything. But that's the way that I look at it. I don't view as my responsibility to prove to anybody that I'm any more virtuous than the guy down the street as a news gatherer. I don't have necessarily a responsibility to be the face of journalism writ large, in so much as all I can do with whatever resources I have to do it is to pursue the closest thing I can get to the truth.
The ultimate challenge. And this is for everybody on the panel. How has the reliance on the internet for news and knowledge increased the polarizing effect it's had on people's opinions and the sense of division that we feel in the community? And what can we do to offset that bias? Who wants to tackle that one? That looks like a John Cruzan question to me.
Boy.
I think bottom line is the internet playing too much of a role? Are we relying too much on it as a source of truth to really have it pay out as being the ultimate source of truth, or should we diversify where we're searching?
I think we should diversify where we're searching. I think it's difficult for many individuals to sort out, is this legit, is this real, does this make any sense? It appeals to their emotions or their particular bent to life, and so it becomes the gospel, as it were, to them. Well, it may or may not be. I think all of us probably ought to diversify our news sources. I know where I tend to get my news, and I believe that that's where I should, but there are other things I probably should take in. I haven't got myself to do that yet, but I recognize that. So I don't know if that gets at the answer to that question or not. But
anybody else have a thought on that particular topic?
I think many of us can remember when the internet was new, right? And one of the things I respect about local news and local newspapers is when you open up the paper, there's news. And then you have a section that says opinion. It's pretty well delineated, there's no confusion. There's not a bunch of writers, scattered throughout a particular issue of the newspaper in a variety of different places, mixing news with opinion. And that's what we get, I think, with sources from the internet is that opinion matter coming over as somehow news and factual. And we have to be pursuers of the truth, and teach ourselves and our kids to look for the truth. Don't just look for something that agrees with.
it's too easy to not vet that stuff
Yeah.
out. Oh, here it is.
Yeah, and depending upon your mood, it's like, see, I knew I was right. But it really is. You have to be conscious, and I think one of the things that we have in Janesville and we need in our communities locally is our local news source, our local newspaper, hitting all of our, as many of our homes and our businesses as possible, because again, there's an opinion section and there's a news section, and to me that clearly says how we should look at some issues.
Sometimes there are those that would say those sections get blurred in the paper and we should do a bigger, better job of putting the label, the header on there that says opinion, and the other side of the ledger being news. Well, it's a challenge.
And I think it's also, some recent issues that I've seen, sometimes it does seem like the opinion part of it does seem to get to be carry maybe too many columns. And I think it definitely, like for me, I would appreciate, there's more news per se. But, people with opinions have a lot to say.
Yes, and my freedom of speech will continue to be exercised as long as you're willing to listen, I think is how that goes. Question for all of you to think about. Some of us, myself included, have made the observation that we're seeing more and more organized political parties with political ideologies introducing their energy, their time, their resources into nonpartisan local government races. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Should we be concerned, or should we be embracing them and saying, welcome aboard? Lisa, thoughts?
Sometimes when political parties push too much for a candidate in a local city, county, sometimes they're pushing ideas for things that are actually should be at the state level, not at the county level. They're not things the county can affect or the cities can affect. It's very divided what we can actually make decisions on. And sometimes that piece that gets there it makes us spend a lot of energy on things that when we really need to spend that energy and what we can help and what we can do in our communities with what our responsibilities are on those boards in those communities.
It kind of falls into that whole conversation about what I call the one-trick pony candidate. They have the single issue, and it's the most important issue in their mind, and they will pursue that issue at all costs, irrespective of whether or not the right place to deal with it is at the city, the town, the village, the state, or the federal level. It sometimes is akin to that ideological bent that I represent this issue and this is the party that's behind that issue. And oftentimes you find yourself, well, that isn't something we deal with at that level. Is it a good idea or a bad idea, Michael Jackson, from your perspective, to see the infusion of capital coming from organized political interests who want to impose an ideology in an arena where process is perhaps more important than ideology ever could possibly be?
I think it's bad, and I think it's really important that the town board, the county board, or city council, whatever that governing entity is, be, can I say, religious in the pursuit of nonpartisanship. When we allow partisanship to taint us, we quit serving, in my opinion, the populace, and we serve this particular group, this lobbyist, this particular opinion. When I was a minister, I would tell my people, as a minister, I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican. I'm a pastor, and I pastor Democrats and Republicans. I pastor blacks and whites and browns and reds. I pastor young and old, rich and poor. And that's how I see myself as a city official, that as a nonpartisan, I can honestly say I am, and I endeavor to be, nonpartisan, and I resent the intrusion into that as a violation of some sacred trust that would say, I want you to represent this segment to the exclusion of this segment. No, the city of Janesville elected me, and I really want to represent the whole of Janesville, those I agree with, and also those who I do not agree with. I think it's imperative that we maintain that separation and be nonpartisan.
Others thought on that issue?
I think maybe this is a little bit of a different issue, but I think a more indirect statement, I guess, of partisanship that finds its way into local government, as a county board, a city council, whatever it is this idea that our debate or our arguments are front loaded with these sort of pieces of like national or federal or congressional political dogma that just gets baked into issues that are so local that it's almost like there's this mismatch in thinking that but you see it where you start to get into a pattern in discourse at a city council meeting where you've got these pieces of dogma that can't be pulled apart from what the core thing that you're talking about that has nothing to do with national politics. But you end up having, sometimes you could have a group of people that everybody is circling around the same island, and they're all warning each other about rocks that they perceive or see that they don't think anybody else can see. And then the argument becomes, is that a rock or is that a seagull swimming in the water, or is it just waves? Instead of the idea that, boy, there's got to be a course that we can chart as voyagers together in this, that we can chart in a way that we get rid of the fear and the dogma that in some ways we latch onto because you have to latch onto something. But instead of latching onto each other and saying, we're going to voyage our way through this because there are very few islands that have so many rocks around them that you can't find a path.
Interesting. Question again from the audience. Where does the panel see the future of law enforcement in the community?
I'll
Rhonda?
preface it just a little bit because I am
Yeah.
on the Police and Fire Commission.
Yep.
Janesville, so just looking at the city of Janesville, is a low crime city. It's just the way it is. We have crime. We know that we have crime. What I've seen is a police department that is aggressively pushing for increased diversity, increased training, and increased opportunities to connect with the community. And, in my opinion, that's where change starts. That's where understanding, not only is there the law enforcement aspect of these officials, but there's also the peacekeeping aspect and the community aspect. Our law enforcement, our protective services. I'm sorry, I don't want to be a resident in Janesville without a police department. I don't want to be a resident in Janesville without a fire department. I think they're very important. But I am seeing a very dedicated push to increasing diversity in training, which it's needed in our businesses and it's needed in our services that our government provides.
Any last words from any of you? Have we convinced all of you that you're going to, if you haven't run previously, run for office, and if you have run for office and have since retired,
Come back!
Are you thinking of joining us in the fold? And
You
you always have an opportunity.
You mean run away or run
Run
further?
away. I hope the evening has been helpful for folks. We wanted to have a general conversation tonight to set the stage for next week. Next week when we gather, we're going to be talking more specifically about the role of county government in what we call this a community. And if you're up to it and you choose to join us over the course of the next few weeks, county government is next on the agenda. We'll follow that with a conversation about school boards and school board trustees. What's the role? What do they do, and why do they do it? Then we'll get into cities and villages and towns, and the whole goal is to give people some basic understanding of the roles of the individual units of government that frankly touch each and every one of us in our lives day in and day out. I thank the folks who have joined us on the panel tonight. I think they're going to be more than gracious in sticking around a few minutes after we break. So if you have questions for them or want to visit with them, I'm confident that they'll be willing to stay on for a few minutes. In the meantime, I would sincerely invite you to join us next week, next Tuesday night, same time, same place. I will mention to you that these programs are going to be rebroadcast on JATV, the local access channel, and on their YouTube channel, so they will be available for you to watch going forward. The premiere will be on Thursday, the 29th of September at 1 o'clock, and then it'll replay again at 7 o'clock. And then for each succeeding week, we'll have a regular slot on the Thursday JATV outlet, and then YouTube will have a continuous archive of these programs as we go forward. Again, thank you to the panelists. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. I want to make sure that, well, if you've got questions, if you've got issues, if you've got concerns, we're here to listen, and we're here hopefully to provide you an opportunity to get some answers to those questions. And we would hope that well, you feel free to join us. This is an a la carte menu, so
Rich,
so
I
come back as
understand
you
that
can.
each week it'll be a different panel too.
And each week we'll have a different panel of experts that will be coming in and talking specifically from their perspective. So you'll have a mix of elected officials, you'll have a mix of elected officials and consumers, and folks that have been on all sides of the specific unit of government that we're talking with. I would remind folks that our presentation is well, solely the views of the panelists and myself. It doesn't reflect the views necessarily of any of our sponsors or our benefactors. I would hope that you'd give us the courtesy, if you wish to reuse any portions of the evening's events, that you contact us, because we want to make sure that they're used properly. I thank you all for your time, your attention, and I really look forward to seeing you again next week. And with that, we're going to take a breather, and then folks will be here to answer any questions and to visit with you for the duration. Thanks again.